bit more remote technology. I'm going to try to make some guideline videos for some of the things that you are going to see in your online content, just to help expand on those things and to give you a little bit more information on how they work. I'm hoping that this won't be a long kind of thing or a long lecture, just kind of something very short. So in Spanish, you may remember that whenever we were first talking about verbs, we talked about how there were 4 different categories of verbs. Those categories of verbs were regular verbs, irregular verbs, stem changers, and irregulars. These are the 4 categories of verbs that exist in the present tense. So whenever I say a verb is a regular verb, what I mean is that that verb has a regular stem. And when I say it has a regular stem, that means the stem doesn't change. You may remember whenever we learned AR, ER, and IR verbs, we learned that the ending told us where we were in time, that is to say in the present tense, and who was the subject or who was speaking, right? So whenever we are taking off that ending and putting something on, but we don't alter the words that come before it, we just take off the AR and we add on something new, what we're saying is that stem is regular because we have not altered the stem of the verb at all. Instead, what we have done is just take off the ending and put on a present tense ending. So that is a regular stem. So that's one pattern of verbs in the present. We also have irregular patterned verbs, and that's the verbs that we're going to talk about now. So I'll save those for a moment. We also have stem changers. Those we're going to see a little bit later. All that means is the stem has to change before we do the conjugation. And then we also have irregular verbs. Those irregular verbs mean that they don't follow any type of particular pattern. They kind of beat their own drum, as it were, and you just have to memorize however it is that they come. Now the verbs that we're going to talk about today are irregular verbs. Now irregular verbs, that as a category means, right, that the stem is irregular only in the form, right? Only in the form does the stem become irregular. That's what that category means. So whenever we're thinking about conjugation, we're not going to think about changing the ending. Because remember, right, the ending tells us where we are in time. So we're still going to have ES, E, right, EMOS, EIS, EN, because we have an ER verb, right? We're still going to have AR endings if we have an AR verb. We're still going to have IR endings here, like with salir, if we have an IR verb. That's not going to change, right? We still have to make sure that we're going to match up whatever infinitive we took off with whatever set of verb endings that indicate that we're in the present tense and indicate who is the subject of the sentence. So that's not going to change. All we're saying in this category is that in the form, the stem changes. So for example, in this verb, hacer, the stem is HAC. What we're saying is that when we create the form, that HAC becomes HAG. We're saying the stem of this verb is the part without the infinitive, right? So we're saying this stem is going to change, but only when we are in the form. The rest of the time, that verb will stay exactly the same as if it was a regular patterned verb, right? That's all we're saying. I hope that isn't confusing. Now, what that means is that with these verbs, the most important form that you need to memorize is the yo form, right? Because that's the part that you need to learn. So, for example, we have a type of yo form. These verbs are sometimes called go verbs because they end in go. Let's see. And that's one category of irregular yo verbs. So when we're forming like hacer, it's an irregular yo, so the tú, él, nosotros, vosotros, ellos, ellas, ustedes, all of that's gonna all stay the same as if it was a regular verb, right? Only the yo is gonna be different. So here I've written down some of the ones that have an irregular yo form, like poner, pongo, salir, salgo, oír, oigo, traer, traigo. Here are ones that don't end in the word go, but that have an irregular yo form. So saber, which is one that people get wrong a lot, is going to be yo sé, but with an accent mark, because the other one is a pronoun, so you have to make sure, remember, whenever we put accent marks, oftentimes that's going to indicate the difference between one word or another word. But the rest of the verb is going to be regular, right? Here's the root, here's the root. We find the root in we find the stem, the root or the stem, in all of these different verbs, right? And that's what we're gonna find. So when we look at these irregular yo verbs, we wanna remember the yo form. Yo conozco, yo estoy, yo doy, yo veo. So whenever we're thinking about irregular yo verbs, the first thing that we want to ask ourselves is it a yo, right? Is it a yo form? Because if it's not a yo form, then it's regular by default, right? So let's look at it. Here already we see the subject is tú. So we know it's not a yo, so that means it's regular. So we're going to conjugate it like a regular verb. When we conjugate a regular verb, we take off the ER, we write the stem out, and then we add on the appropriate ending that indicates that we're in the present tense. So in this case, it would be, because it's an ER verb, it would be ES. Now, we immediately have a yo. So we know that poner is going to be in a regular yo form, because it's just a part of those batch of words that we memorize as having to do with the irregular yo category. And so we think to ourselves, okay, the stem is going to change. I have to remember that the yo form of poner is always going to be pongo in the present tense. Here, again, we don't have a yo. So we know that it's just going to function like a regular verb. So we are going to take off the AR and keep the root, EST, and then we're going to add on the appropriate ending that would go with an AR verb, which in this case is an A. Now, estar has accent marks on all of the words except for the yo and the nosotros form. So in this case, right, we would need an accent mark. This is to indicate the difference between esta and está. Esta, no accent mark on the A, means this. Está, accent mark on the A, means is. So again, the accent mark indicating that there is a difference in meaning between two words. Here we have estar, but we have a yo. So I remember, oh, estar is an irregular yo verb. So that means the only possible present tense form of estar is yo estoy. Hugo y yo conocer a la tía Isabel. So here we have, right, we don't have a yo form because we have Hugo. So when we have more than one person, even if I'm in the group, it's a we, right? So if I said Maria and I, in English, that's still a we. So it's the same in Spanish, right? I said Hugo y yo, but that's still a we. So, which is the nosotros form. So here we know that we have a nosotros form. So we know that since it's not a yo, it's going to just be regular. So we would do what we would regularly do. We're going to take off the ER, put C-O-N-O-C, right? That's the stem or the root of the word. And then we're just going to put on the appropriate present tense ending for that ER verb, which is hemos, right? As a nosotros form. But now we have a yo form. So I remember that conocer was one of the batch of words that I memorized as being a part of the irregular yo verbs, and that the only possible yo form of conocer in the present tense is conozco. So I'm going to write conozco. Okay? Here I have Tomás y Víctor saber tocar el piano. So I don't have a yo in here, so I know that it's going to function regularly. So I'm going to function like a regular verb. I would take off the ER, I'm going to write the root, right? Then I'm going to put on the appropriate ending for this verb, right? Which is an ER verb, so it's going to end in EN. Okay? But here I have a yo. So I remember, right, that saber is one of these verbs that I memorized as being a part of the irregular yo category, and that the only possible yo form of saber in the present tense is sé. So I write that down. I can tell you how many times whenever I am reading tests, I read the word sabo, which is just a the root with an O on the end of it. However, the word sabo actually, it doesn't mean anything in Spanish. It's just a gibberish word. So that's something to kind of remember, is that if a word isn't, this is a new word that we haven't seen before, right? But it doesn't follow that the word that we might make up that makes sense to us conjugation-wise is an actual word. Sometimes it's not a word. In this case, it's not. Okay, so the last one we have, or the last two examples, we have vosotros salir temprano. So here, right, we don't have a yo, so we're just going to conjugate it regularly. So we're going to take off the IR and then write the root. Okay, then after we take off the IR and write the root, we're going to think about the vosotros form of IR verbs, which is is. Okay? And that indicates to us that we are doing it in the present tense, and vosotros is the subject. Right? Finally, we have the last one here, and we have a yo. So I remember salir is one of the irregular yo verbs that I was meant to memorize as a part of that category, and that the only possible yo form in the present of salir is salgo. This is another example. I said, right, sabo is not a word. But here, sado, also not a word in Spanish. So, those are things to kind of remember. I hope that those examples were helpful to you as to how to think about using irregular yo verbs. Remember that if you're memorizing these yo forms, it means that this is the only possible yo form of this verb in the present tense. That's something to remember and to keep in mind whenever you're thinking about irregular yo verbs. The only way to know, is a verb an irregular yo verb or not, is to just memorize these verbs and their yo form. Unfortunately, all languages require some element of memorization. There's no easy trick sometimes. All right, I hope that was very helpful, and I will see you again whenever we talk about stem changers. Thanks, and have a great day.